it gives me a great deal of pleasure to introduce Governor Bobby Jindal.
Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. Mallory, thank you for that very generous introduction. Mallory's been a great friend for many years. You know, Mark, you and I probably shared this experience when you're in elected office. I actually lost my first campaign running for office. And people ask me, what's the difference between losing and winning an election? And I tell people, you've got a lot more friends when you win an election than when you lose an election. I remember when I had won, there was a state official in my state who had publicly endorsed my opponent. He'd gone and worked for my opponent. He'd been on TV for my opponent. He'd attacked me publicly. When I won, he came to see me. He said, Bobby, I was secretly for you from the very first day. So, you know, I'm new to politics. I said, next time I want you to be publicly for me. Secretly, you be for the other guy all you want. Mallory's been a great friend even before I was elected to governor. He's been publicly and privately, in any way, a great friend to me and a great leader for your state. So I'm honored to be here with you. It was such a great honor to hear the speakers before me. You know, as we were visiting, Catherine goes, well, you know, the good news is at least Mallory's not ripping off anybody's jokes. You know, he's writing his own jokes. And I thought that was pretty kind. Chip, we've got some of the same issues in our legislature and some of the same challenges y'all face, and so it was great to get your update. Mark and I were colleagues together as governor. I'll tell you just real quickly, one of my fondest memories was in November, my first year as governor, President Obama had just been elected, had not yet been sworn in, and met, Mark, I don't know if you remember, he met with all the governors up in Philadelphia in Constitutional Hall, this historic setting. He had this incredible approval rating, and everybody was so excited to meet the new president-elect. He hadn't done anything yet, and everybody had great hopes he was going to change the culture of D.C. and be this new guy. I hadn't voted for him, and Mark hadn't voted for him, but we all went there, you know, thinking this was going to be this bipartisan kumbaya. He got up and he spoke. He'd already said that he was going to address health care, so we kind of had a fear of what was coming. And I can't quote, and I can't even paraphrase because he did it so beautifully. Mark got up. There was a question and answer period for the governors with the new president. And Mark got up, and again, I wish somebody had recorded it because it sounded like it was the nicest, most sincere, most complimentary statement to the new president. But when he was finished, he basically just knifed him in the back in the nicest possible way. And I just remember thinking, boy, that was good. I don't know how he did that, and he did it with a pleasant smile, and he sounded so great. You know, in Louisiana, I think it's true in South Carolina as well. You know, whenever we say something really bad about somebody, and it's a Southern thing, we'll say, you know, God bless his soul, as if that makes it okay. You can call him whatever you want as long as you put that at the end of your statement. I thought about what I wanted to share with you, and there is a lot, and you've heard from the previous speakers, so much of what concerns us in our country today. Like Mark, I do worry about now almost $18 trillion of debt. Like Mallory, I've got young children. I worry about the future we leave ahead of them. I worry about Obamacare. I worry about this president's mess of a foreign policy. I worry about the regulations coming out of the EPA that could smother our economy. I worry about so much that this president is doing every single day. A lot of that can be reversed with conservative leadership in D.C. The thing that worries me the most, the thing that troubles me the most, is what this president is doing to redefine the American dream. He's doing it by rhetoric. He's doing it by his actions. If you listen carefully, if you watch his policies, what you see is a president who's intent on redefining the American dream to being a dream that's defined by dependence on government. It involves a larger, more expensive, more intrusive federal involvement in our daily lives. You hear this president talk about class warfare, dividing us by gender, by geography, by race. You hear a president talk about redistribution. I don't know about you, but that is not the American dream my parents taught me. My parents taught me about an American where our country is forever young. An American dream where you're not guaranteed equality of outcomes, you are guaranteed equality of opportunity. Where the circumstances of your birth don't determine your outcomes as an adult. You don't have to be born in the right neighborhood, the right zip code, the right parents, the right gender, the right race to do great things in this country. How many generations of American parents have told their little kids, you could be the first in our family to go to school. You could be the first in our family to start a business. You could be the first in our family to become a doctor, a farmer, a lawyer, whatever it is you dream of being. Indeed, I joke, how many moms have told their little boys and girls, anybody can grow up to become president of the United States. Now, unfortunately, we find out how true that was in 2012 and 2008 before that. But we have got to fight to preserve that American dream for our children. The reason I'm so passionate about it, my parents lived the American dream. My dad's one of 9. Grew up in a house without electricity, without running water. Was the only one that got past the 5th grade in our family. I know because we heard those stories every single day growing up. You try to ask a dad like that for an allowance, good luck. All I heard was he wanted to charge me room and board if I was going to get paid an allowance. Here's the amazing thing about my parents. Nearly 50 years ago, my mom and dad, my mom's pregnant with me, my dad, who has finally gotten his education, they come halfway across the world so that my mom could go to school at LSU in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Now, they came legally, by the way, when they came to this country, but they came to this country nearly 50 years ago. But here's what's amazing to me. They had never gotten on a plane. There was no internet. There was no cell phones. It was expensive to travel. They never even met anybody who had been to Louisiana. They couldn't ask somebody, what is the weather like? What's the food like? What are the people like? What's it like in this strange place halfway across the world? But they knew in their bones there was this special place called America. My dad just knew in his bones if you could get there and if you were willing to work hard, you could do great things for your children, your grandchildren. You could have a better quality of life. There was freedom and there was opportunity in this special place. So my parents get here, and I love what my dad does next. They're in student housing, running out of money. My dad didn't come here to get on a government program. He wanted a job. So he does what he knows to do. He doesn't know anybody. He opens the yellow pages, and he starts calling companies looking for work. And I love this story because I don't know how long it took him. I don't know if it was days, weeks. I don't know how many hours he was on the phone. I don't know how many people slammed the phone down on him, laughed in his face, and rejected him. But he was running out of money. He had to feed his pregnant wife, so he kept calling and calling and calling. And then finally, he convinces a guy from a railroad company, sight unseen, to take a chance on him. The guy says, I'm so impressed by your desire to work, you can start work Monday morning. I love what my dad tells his new boss. Hasn't even met the guy yet. You have to meet my dad to understand this. Tells his new boss, that's great. He says, now look, I don't have a car. I don't have a driver's license. Tells his new boss, you're going to have to pick me up on the way to work Monday morning. The guy was so impressed by his desire to work, he did that. 6 months later, I was born. I was what you would now politely call a pre-existing condition. Now, they were married. I didn't predate the marriage. I don't want you to get the wrong idea. But there was no Obamacare, and their insurance didn't cover me, and I love what my dad did next. My dad just went to the doctor. He didn't fill out any government forms. There was a government hospital down the road where you could have gone called Charity Hospital. But instead, he went to Women's Hospital, where 2 of our kids would later be born many years later. Went to the doctor at Women's Hospital, shook hands with the doctor, and said, I will send you a check every month until I pay this bill in full. No contract, no government programs, 2 guys, a doctor and a father, just shaking hands in a hospital. When my kids were born, we had Blue Cross. It took us hours to fill out the insurance forms at the same hospital. But you know, it was a simpler time back then. I asked my dad, how would that work today? How do you pay for a baby on layaway? I mean, now think about that. If you skip a payment, can they take the baby back? What does the hospital do? I mean, they send an ambulance? And he tells me, no, look, son, you're paid for. Don't worry about it. He said, you're such a bad little kid. We would have skipped a payment if they would have taken you back. But he goes, no, we paid your bill. I tell you that because growing up, my dad, you know, Mark Twain said that our parents, the older we get, the smarter our parents become. And as I've gotten older, I find myself, I don't know about you, I've turned more and more into my dad. And I hate it. I say things to my kids I swore I would never say when I was a little boy. My dad used to tell me, well, son, you don't live in a democracy. As long as you live under my roof, you live under my rules. This is a dictatorship as long as you're living at my roof. I hate it when he said that. I say that to my kids all the time. My dad used to tell me, now, son, if your friends jumped off the bridge, would you jump off a bridge? Had no idea what it meant, hated it back then. I say it to my little kids all the time today. But there was something else my dad would tell us as well. He'd say, now, sons, I'm not giving you a famous last name. I'm not giving you an inheritance. I will make sure you get a great education. Because if you work hard, there's no limit on what you can accomplish in this country. But he used to also tell us this. He'd say, every night you should get on your knees and thank God Almighty that you are blessed enough to be born in the greatest country in the history of the world, the United States of America. You know, I'll be honest, I really didn't understand all that he was trying to teach me, but now that I've got kids, I do understand what he was trying to teach me. This is a special place, and we should never take it for granted. There are several things we can do to preserve that American dream for our children and grandchildren. I want to share with you just 4 real quickly. You know, I formed an organization called America Next. I think Mark and the others have spoken before me are exactly right. We can't just be the party of no. We can't just be the party that says we're anti-Obama on everything. I oppose this president a lot. I've sued him over Common Core to stop that spread throughout our country. I called for Eric Holder to step down over Fast and Furious years ago. I have gone and I went to D.C. and called this president cynical, immoral, and hypocritical for suing my state over our school choice programs. I'm not getting invited back to the White House, by the way, under this president, but I have stood against this president time and time again, but we as a conservative movement, as Republicans, need to also show what we are for and how our path is better, how our ideas are better. 4 simple areas. And America Next is articulating detailed policies. The first, as Mallory hinted at, was education. And with education, it's pretty simple. What we've done in Louisiana, what I recommend we do across this country is pretty simple. We've done a lot of things. But it really boils down to this. Instead of making the child follow the dollar, let the dollar follow the child. Trust parents to make the best decisions about how their children should be educated. We've done that in Louisiana. 90% of our kids are in charter schools in New Orleans. We've got homeschoolers. We've got kids going to private schools with our scholarship dollars. We've got kids who go to public school part of the day, private school the rest of the day. We've got all kinds of programs. The point is this: every child learns differently. The second thing, yes, we need to repeal Obamacare, but we also need to replace Obamacare. We put out a 16-point plan on how you actually lower health care costs. Remember that promise? Premiums were going down $2,500 by the end of his first term. Remember, you could keep your doctor, you could keep your health care plan. Now, nobody wants to go back to the health care system the way it was exactly before Obamacare, but Obamacare has only made things worse. We don't need bureaucrats between doctors and their patients. Third, we put out a plan a couple of weeks ago called The Path Towards Energy Independence. America has been blessed. We've got a tremendous opportunity. And of course, I'm for oil and gas. I come from the state of Louisiana, but I'm for all of the above. And the reality is we've got an opportunity with affordable energy to bring good-paying manufacturing jobs back into this country. Let's be honest about what the left really wants. The left wants energy to be scarce. They want it to be expensive. The reason they want that is it gives one more excuse for the federal government to be involved in our lives. I went to D.C. and I called the president a science denier. The reality is, by exporting energy-intensive manufacturing jobs overseas, all we're doing is actually hurting the environment. That next big steel mill gets built in Brazil. That next big production facility goes to China. That is more pollution in the air because their regulations are looser than ours, and that's fewer good-paying jobs right here at home for American workers. You know, if we just harness the energy available to us, we could increase median income by 7%. We could create 2 million manufacturing jobs. The president talks about stimulus. Here's a stimulus plan that doesn't involve federal spending, federal borrowing, doesn't involve more debt. Simply involves us taking advantage of our own energy. We can create a North America energy supermarket, superpower, where we're actually energy independent. How ironic. Mexico and Canada are moving towards a free market approach to energy, just as America is moving the other direction. And then fourth and finally today, literally today, and we'll be talking about this at the Citadel tomorrow, and I'm excited about that great honor and opportunity. Great institution. We've got some of the students here today. We've been unveiling, and I'll be unveiling tomorrow specifically, a plan in terms of restoring America's defense. Under this president, we've hollowed out our military. You know, a few weeks ago, the president admitted what we all knew. He said he had no coherent strategy when it comes to defeating ISIS. It wasn't a verbal gaffe, it was actually the truth. But you know what? This president doesn't have a coherent foreign policy. Then everybody got mad because on Friday, Vice President Biden started insulting the few allies we've got left in the Middle East. It's not a gaffe. This president spent 6 years insulting our allies, whether it's Great Britain, Israel, or any other country that had the temerity to stand with us. This president does not believe in American exceptionalism. Up until 2012, when I was campaigning to try to deny this president a second term, I used to go around the country saying President Obama was the worst president since Jimmy Carter. After the re-election, I went to D.C. and I actually publicly apologized to Jimmy Carter. I think that was a bit unfair. I see my time is up. I'll end with 2 sentences and then take your questions. The first sentence is this. This president does not believe in American exceptionalism, does not understand a stronger America leads to a more peaceful and stable world. My final sentence is this. For all the problems I've outlined for you today, I still think my dad is right. I'm still an optimist that we are blessed to live in the greatest country in the history of the world. It is not preordained or inevitably so. It is up to this generation to do what every generation has done before us. It is now our turn to choose for ourselves to renew the principles of freedom as our 40th president warned us we must do, so our children can do what we were taught to do by our parents. And thank God Almighty, we were blessed to be born in the greatest country in the history of the entire world. Thank you all very much for allowing me to come speak to you. Thank you all very much. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you all. Thank you all very, very much.
Okay, host prerogative. First question.
I bet you it's about Cambridge versus Ocknell. I'm just teasing.
You know what it's going to be. Are you going to be seeking the Republican nomination for the presidency of the United States?
Well, a couple of thoughts about that. First, I will certainly, it is something I'm thinking about. I'll be honest. My wife and I are thinking about it. We are thinking and praying about it. You know, it's funny. I got actually attacked, of all things. Who would have thought this is how far we've gone? One of the things I didn't talk about today that I look forward to talking about in the future is religious liberty. I think it's a huge issue in our country. And I told a reporter we were thinking and praying about this, and he attacked me for saying I was praying about it. And I said, I don't know how you would make a big decision without prayer. To me, that is just commonsensical. It is something we're thinking about praying. We won't make that decision before November. We've got a lot of elections we need to win in November. We've got to re-elect your governor, Nikki Haley, here in South Carolina. We've got Tim Scott and Lindsey Graham we need to re-elect to the United States Senate as well. Mark doesn't even have an opponent. I never ran unopposed. He doesn't even have an opponent. So we've got to keep our majority. Yeah, you can give him a round of applause for that. He's already won his re-election. We've got, I'm not going to repeat that. He's got, we've got, you can elbow him, Mark. It's all right. We've got to retire Harry Reid. We've got a lot of important elections we got to win in November. I'll make that decision sometime after the holidays, but I will tell you this. One of the things I've sensed, because I've been traveling the country helping especially gubernatorial candidates, but other candidates as well, one of the things I sense is there's a great frustration in this country. I think there's frustration not only in the Democratic Party, but also in the Republican Party. People are ready for a hostile takeover of D.C. Here's one of my great concerns, and I hope we retire Harry Reid. One of my great concerns is we take the majority this November and then nothing changes. Because people will be just as mad as Republicans as they are at Democrats if after we get the majority, it's business as usual. Remember this, President Obama only had the Senate and the House for 2 years, got the stimulus done, got Obamacare did more to advance progressivism than any president in a very long time. President Bush had the Senate and the House for 6 years. What are the lasting conservative changes we can point to? And I've got a lot of respect and admiration for the president, don't get me wrong, for President Bush, but what are the conservative principles we can point to and say, that's what got done in the 6 years we had the majority. So I hope we take the majority, but then I hope we do something with it after November.
Next question.
First, if you could extend my regards to the Robertsons next time you're with them.
I will.
But one thing that is really attracting young people like myself is privacy. How do you feel about the NSA and certain civil liberties?
Sure. Well, 2 things. One, first on the Robertsons, I'll tell you, one of the reasons I stood up for Phil and the Duck Dynasty family is I'm tired of the hypocrisy of the left. They're for tolerance and they're for respect unless you happen to disagree with them. And I took my kids to see the show. You know, they actually allowed me to be in part of one. They've been friends for a number of years. 364 days of the year, my kids think that Daddy does a very boring job as governor. That one day, they actually thought Daddy did something interesting. When it comes to the NSA and privacy, look, I think this president, under this president, we have seen abuses of federal power none of us thought we would ever live to see. I'll be honest. I'm not a guy that's naturally conspiratorial-minded, but if you had gone back in 6 years, 7 years ago and told me, do you really believe this would have happened, I would have been shocked. But every time we see a new revelation, it's almost this, every time you think you can't get any worse, it does. So literally under the Department of Justice, now think about some of the abuses of government power we've seen in this administration. We have seen guns provided to Mexican drug cartels in Fast and Furious. We have seen the IRS go after conservative groups for their political beliefs. We've seen the Department of Justice spy on AP reporters. We have seen scandal after scandal throughout this entire administration, and there's no accountability. We've seen a president who ignores the law, chooses which parts of the Constitution he wants to obey, when he wants to obey it, when he's implementing Obamacare, when he's releasing prisoners, when he's doing prisoner swaps with the Taliban. Time and time again, just when you think, well, they couldn't possibly do any worse, something new comes out. So I think that we are rightfully skeptical of a broad government power. I think that we are rightfully skeptical on the abuse, the potential abuse, and the actual abuse of the government's powers to intrude into our private lives. I absolutely want our government to fight, be able to fight and win the war on terrorists. I do think there's an important line between what our government does overseas and what it does here domestically at home to American citizens. So I think we're right to be skeptical of the government. I think we need to ask tough questions. I'm not a big proponent, Mark and I both served in Congress, I'm not a big proponent one of the things I actually wrote in my book was, I think we should pay Congress on a per diem basis, except we should pay them for every day they stay out of D.C. rather than every day they go to D.C. I think there's a lot of mischief that happens. Mark Twain said your wallet's safest when the legislature is out of session. But one of the things I think Congress does need to be doing more of is providing more oversight to this government. I think the executive branch has run amok under this administration. So I think you're absolutely right to be worried about our privacy rights, our liberty rights here at home. And I'll be honest with you, 6, 7 years ago, if you'd come to me and predicted how bad this administration would be, I don't know if I would have believed it. I would have said, oh, you're making that up. It couldn't possibly get that bad, even under a Democratic president. I hate to admit it, this president has proven time and time again, just when we thought it couldn't get any worse, it does. And they continue to break our trust. Every time you want to try to give them the benefit of the doubt, something else new happens, and you realize, well, maybe it is as bad as we always thought it was when you look at all the abuse of government power. So absolutely, I think you're right to be worried about that.
Next question.
Today at AEI, you mentioned about that the United States military should not be nation builders or building democracy, which I completely agree with. But what should conservatives do about supporting organizations like NED, IRI, as well as private organizations that go and work with center-right parties throughout the world?
Sure, a couple of things. One, and I did give, and I'll be again talking at the Citadel tomorrow about the role of the military. And one of my points was that you don't fund your military for domestic political concerns. You don't fund your military for Keynesian economic development. But you fund your military because you want to protect your country. It's actually the first most important role that's actually described in the Constitution for the federal government. It's the one thing that the Founding Fathers said the federal government has to do is actually have to protect our country. When it comes to the so-called soft powers, the soft tools of diplomacy, two things. One, when it comes to funding groups overseas, just because something is good and something ought to be done doesn't necessarily mean the federal government has to do it. And I think that's something we have got to rediscover in this country. And that was part of the rationale behind earmarks. That was part of the rationale behind all these out-of-control federal spending. People would argue, well, these are good projects. Well, they may be good projects. That doesn't mean that our federal tax dollars should be doing those things. The Founding Fathers didn't intend for the Congress, for the federal government to be doing anything and everything for us. And there's a reason there's a 10th Amendment to the Constitution. So one, I think we do need to be looking more towards private funding, charitable funding, trust funding for a lot of activities the government does today. Secondly, I do think there are soft tools of diplomacy that can be used to complement our military strength. And one of the things I said at AEI today, for example, Ronald Reagan built up the Pentagon and therefore deterred Russian then Soviet aggression. At the same time, he gave moral and other encouragement to freedom movements in Eastern Europe. Not slush funds, not politically wasteful spending, not just money that was given out to dictators, but actually to help encourage folks who are standing up to regimes that were hostile to the United States and help to advance American interests without putting American troops in harm's way. So I'm not going to stand up here and say that there's never a reason to use soft power. There are times where using the soft tools, soft powers of diplomacy and democracy are very appropriate. And I think Reagan's example of funding these pro-democracy, pro-freedom groups, movements in Eastern Europe at that time was a great example, and there may be analogous examples today. The problem has been that too often we see State Department dollars, we see foreign aid dollars, we see a lot of American dollars going to dictators, funding groups that are counter to American interests without any accountability. So I think there is an appropriate role, but I think it has to be overseen, and I don't think that everything that's good needs to be funded by the federal government. I think there are a lot of things that are good that the federal government should have nothing to do with. Quite often there are state or local responsibilities. Other times they're the private sector's responsibilities.
Peggy Noonan had an excellent op-ed piece in the last couple of days about the bureaucrats in Washington at the hearings and how they don't make any pretense anymore of answering questions, answering them honestly. They look bored. They're certainly not worried about losing their jobs. How do we reverse this?
That's a great question. Two things. One, I think we need a lot fewer of them. In Louisiana, we have cut 28,000 state government jobs since I've been elected governor. But secondly, and I don't say this glibly, I say this sincerely. I'm not as just as a Republican, as a conservative, as an American citizen, I'm offended by what the IRS has done and how they have politicized the system, the tax system, and what are supposed to be sacred transpolitical rights and duties. I think it'd be helpful for a couple of folks at least to go to jail. I think it'd be helpful to set an example. I mean, the earlier question about the NSA, for example, anytime somebody is found, remember the NSA, this is now kind of forgotten. There were government employees found to be using the government's powers to go and look up old girlfriends or to go spy on people. You know, why hasn't somebody at the very least lost their jobs, lost their pensions? I think there need to be serious consequences for these bureaucrats that are abusing the powers that are given to them. You heard an excellent presentation on the power of the unelected bureaucrats. So much of that power is not just on the handful of elected officials. I wouldn't mind a few elected officials going to jail, but that's a whole other story for another day. I think if you sent a couple of those bureaucrats to jail, or at the very least took away their jobs, their pensions, their protections, their retirements, I think that would certainly send a strong signal to the rest of the government. Well, I know my time is up. Let me just say this. This is an important election. We're all frustrated with President Obama, and I cannot wait to call him the former president of the United States. But absolutely, we can't do anything about that in November. What we can do is stop calling Harry Reid majority leader. Let's go out and vote this November, and let's make some positive changes this November. Thank you all very much.
Governor Jindal.